Jalen Hurts knows Georgia very well. He was taken out of a national championship game against the Dogs when he struggled against them. A season later, he comes in and saves the day for Alabama in the SEC championship, getting Alabama to the college football playoff. Now he's got teammates. He's just flooded with Georgia guys all around him, Ryan Curley. And he had a lot to say at the Super Bowl before he won it. This was the biggest quote, though, about the Dogs. He said, "The Georgia background on defense, bringing their ways to the league, I think that has a big impact on our culture that seeps through our teams in many ways." I thought Jalen Hurts played great in the Super Bowl, but I do think the defense was the reason why the Eagles won it. What's Jalen talking about, and is he right?
Well, he's really talking about Kirby Smart, right? And that's what this boils down to. He's talking about the championship DNA and just the need to be the lead on defense. That's what Kirby has tried to instill in the Georgia football program since he got to Athens in 2016, and that floods through the players. It really, really worked there for a couple of years, and it helps when you have the personnel and you just have a ton of it's a
Players.
dogs. I was going to say dogs. I didn't mean Georgia dogs, but just dogs, just fighters. And the Eagles have that too, right? Their entire defense is legit, and when you compare it to the rest of the NFL, it's very good. And now they've got what five or six Georgia Bulldogs back there, four that are heavy contributors to that
Right.
defense when you include Nakobe Dean. I know he didn't play in that Super Bowl due to an injury, but Jalen's not going to hold ill will against the Dogs, and he doesn't need to, right? Because he beat them twice, whether it was in the first half or in the second half, and so he's had a lot of success against Georgia. But he's smart enough to understand what Kirby Smart has built at Georgia and what those players represent. And like Jalen, those guys know how to win too, right? He had a lot of success in college, won national championships, Heisman finalists, all like you were saying earlier. Those guys had it too, so they have that commonality. And they look, these guys are young, man. The Georgia
Yeah.
players that are they're young and they're heavy contributors to a Super Bowl champion defense and a team that's been competing for Super Bowls the last few years. It's that picture where it's Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis all on the defensive line. They're good enough for the Eagles to trust them to run a three-man front with those guys. So from a culture standpoint, that's something I think that we talked a lot about the last few years at Georgia and how that was. And Nolan Smith is a big reason why we talk a lot
I was
about
about to
that.
start talking
And
about
now
him.
now he's there, and then Jalen Hurts kind of has his own personality and the way he runs things. It's kind of similar with Nolan Smith. They're very different personalities, but both kind of come from that same championship type of culture.
I think it'd be one thing if you just had Nakobe on your team. I think it'd be one thing if you just had Nolan Smith. Like and you and I have interacted with Keely, Jordan, but specifically Nolan and the and Nakobe, specifically those two guys. You know, Nolan Smith um, was an adult from day one, and you don't get that a lot. The thing about Georgia's national championship in 21 was that team should have won the national championship. They were the best team in the country. They just got beat by Alabama. Bryce Young played really well one day, that particular day, and they got him. In 22, it turned out that Georgia was the best team. I didn't necessarily know it until they were throttling Oregon and then South
We
Carolina.
knew it pretty early.
It was pretty quick, but in that time, Nolan was on both those teams, and the story goes like this: Nolan Smith had the capability, Ryan, as you recall, after Georgia beat Florida in Jacksonville, to he got injured in that game, and Kirby talked to him and said, "Hey, look, you can just go get ready for the NFL, or you can stick around here and be a part of this team." That's me paraphrasing. And he stuck around and was part of the team. And I think, I don't know that Nolan Smith needed much growth, but I think that provided him another opportunity because you can't go through the NFL. You're not going to play multiple years in the NFL and not have an injury year. Nakobe knows that. I mean, he's dealing with that right, or he dealt with that right now. But I think it helped. I think it helped Nolan grow. The Eagles, or the Eagles, however you want to say it, they are in a great position. Their quarterback is not overly expensive. He's good. He's not overly expensive. You have a balanced, young, first contract team with Nolan, Jalen, Jordan, N'Kobe. I mean, N'Kobe is probably their biggest value off the 53 man. I don't know that off the top. I'm just saying, a third round guy. I mean, you're not hardly paying him. So there will come time when they're like the Bengals and they got to make some decisions. But we're not at that point yet. But when you think about what Georgia had in 21 and 2, what they had was Nolan, and they had a assertive leader in Nolan and N'Kobe, and they had permissive recipients of that style. Quay Walker, Keeley to some degree. I mean, like younger guys were listening, and then when it was their time to step up, Christopher Smith and company, they did. So they broke the glass. There's no telling. Now it's sort of championship or national championship or bust. We see the SEC championship doesn't mean what it used to, Ryan. But I think what Jalen was talking about is exactly what was fading at Alabama when he was there. No, I don't mean that bad towards Nick or them. But, in Jalen Hurts' time at Alabama, they lost the national championship on the last play of the game to Clemson. They won it because of on the last play of the game with Tua, and then they were blown out in the national championship game. And, then he transferred, and that was not the Alabama that was before Jalen. He saw the end of an era. And it may be that we've seen an end of an era at Georgia too, man. You don't know how quick these things can go. But those guys at Georgia, the reason why Georgia won the national championship, not just because of Stetson Bennett or Todd Monken or whatever, they had some really, really good players. And I don't just mean on the field, but I mean they had a lot of adults. And Nolan and N'Kobe were two of them.
Yeah, and I think Jordan was too, right? I mean, he was kind of one of those bigger than life personalities around here in Athens too, and people love Jordan Davis. But it's noticeable when a team just kind of clicks and meshes, and that's what those two teams did, especially that 2021 team. And I remember those press conferences in 2021, and they're talking about the skull sessions they would have. These guys would have these mandatory meetings. They wanted to be at them, but they had these mandatory meetings where they had to sit there and talk about things that weren't football. They had to talk about life. They had to connect. And that's something that, not that each team is not connected, and that the 24, the 23, the 20, the 19 Georgia teams weren't connected like brothers, but you kind of feel a bigger connection when everyone just kind of realizes, hey, like we want to do this one thing. We've got to listen to the people that are leaders, whether it be Kirby Smart, whether it be N'Kobe Dean, whether it be Nolan Smith or Stetson. And they just really rallied around each other. And that transfers when they're all playing together on a team in the NFL. And, people like to kind of make the excuse for Georgia. Well, they were all so good. They all played with each other. Well, everybody's good in the NFL.
Ohio State was very good in 2022.
Yeah, Ohio State. Yeah, and Ohio State had a defense this season that's going to have a few guys that are in the NFL. Right. And you see the fact that it just transferred and worked in the league so quickly. Obviously, the Eagles have a lot of other great players. They've got Montez Sweat, who was a monster in that Super Bowl game.
The receivers they've
got really good defensive backs. Lewis Cine, I don't really understand exactly what his deal is with the Eagles. I don't know if he's like a borderline roster guy. But,
yes.
But
the Eagles wide receivers are
the offense good. Works too. Obviously, we're talking about one of the best. I mean, look at what the Eagles were this season in the NFL. That's what Georgia was in 21 and 22. One of the best quarterbacks, one of the best offensive lines.
I want to say this real quick before it escapes my brain.
Okay.
You mentioned Stetson in 21. I actually don't think Stetson was a leader in the traditional sense of the word until the 22 season, and I don't think it was necessarily. I mean, what sticks out to me the most about his time at Georgia, well, there were a lot of times. But he led the most against Tennessee in 22. That was a big moment. Well, yeah, that. But, we can talk about that on another video sometime soon. It's not the phone call part that I'm thinking of. It was something he did on the sideline. But that 21 team, they were friends. Like, you could tell they were, like, close. Mm-hmm. And, I was close with my teammates in college, and we got our ass beat plenty. So it's not just that, but they had the ability to be good and be friends. My suspicion is that there's a particular level of torture that you have to go through to be a football player under Kirby Smart. And they went through that. And because they went through that, they all sort of understood, okay, this guy went through this. He's good. And so we don't need to worry about how he's going to react when I'm bitching him out at the goal line for what was almost a touchdown for Quay Walker and N'Kobe. It was like, okay, and then like
I think it was Channing Tindall, actually. If you're talking about
I'm sorry, you're right. It was Channing Tindall. I said Quay. I was wrong about that. But that also speaks, by the way, to those two guys as well, to the depth that Georgia had. And people said, well, NIL and all of that's ruined it. Yeah, maybe. But that also gives guys who are younger the capability to come out and play a lot. Bowles has transferred, but it could have been him. Jalen Walker was on those teams. I mean, so there are moments, Chaz Chambliss. I mean, there are times, but that Eagles group worked because they're not trying to make Jalen Hurts do something he's not capable of. They're letting him play quarterback the way he is capable of playing it, and that's not meant as disrespect. He plays it the way he plays it. Why do we have to play right-handed? I mean, if we're left-handed, why don't we play left-handed? If we hit backhands or all we do is shoot threes, if you're really good at that and you can win that way, why does it matter how we do things necessarily?
You got to do it with what the personnel you have is. It's why you see the Ravens play a certain style of offense when you have Lamar Jackson.
Well, why does Jalen? I'm sorry. Why? Here's my question for you. I guess Lamar Jackson gets criticized, but Jalen Hurts really ate it more than Lamar did. I mean, I understand some of this is these are not traditional quarterbacks. I mean, this is traditional now. You better get used to it. Josh Allen plays this way, perhaps more recklessly, but I don't know. I mean, my respect level for Jalen Hurts, it was not non-existent at all, but he's grown and he's performed better. But going back to Stetson and Jalen, if you want to make that comparison, comparatively speaking to the defenses they had and the time that they won, that 21 defense was the reason they were dominant for such a long time. But the reason they beat Alabama was because Stetson played well in the fourth quarter. The defense gave him the capability to get to the fourth quarter to play, and then he took it from there. The Super Bowl, I remember the throw from Jalen, but he just did what he had to do. He kept it between the lines, and they scored a bunch of points.
There wasn't a lot of pressure on that offense, and that's what you get when the defense playing really well. But when you play freely like that, things are easier. And when there's not this, we have to score. Sometimes for a certain offense, things are easier. The Eagles were just so good on both sides of the field this season that there wasn't a lot of stress.
I want to get back to the Jalen thing about Georgia because we've gotten off the topic. I started talking about quarterbacks. But I do think, Ryan, that Jalen Hurts would have fit in really well at Georgia, just the way those guys would have fit well at Alabama. But that particular set of Georgia players that has gone there, Keeley, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, N'Kobe, Lewis Cine, I think I'm forgetting somebody else. Those guys, I mean...
Nolan.
So 6 players. I mean, Nolan Smith, he's just an adult, man, and he knew how to be a pro a long time ago. That's what Jalen Hurts is talking about.
Yeah, I think you're right that Jalen would have fit in at Georgia, and they would have had to build the offense around his skill sets, but he would have fit in the culture at Georgia the same way that he fit into the culture at Alabama. Jalen Hurts, is one of the most unselfish college football players we've seen in a while. And at a certain point, he had to make that decision to Oklahoma because it was 1,000% the decision that had to happen for him when you're losing your job to somebody else and you have the opportunity to go and be successful somewhere. But he stuck around.
Wouldn't you rather have Jalen Hurts than Tua long term in the NFL?
In the NFL, yes. Yeah. That's for some other reasons. Part of that's health. But he's performed better. I mean,
this is harsh, but
that's part of it.
Well, here's the thing. Jalen is not, putting himself in position, if you want to say it that way. It's probably the wrong way to say it. Tua at times with the Dolphins, he's been a bit reckless with things. I watched the Eagles a fair amount, not a ton. I don't see Jalen Hurts put himself in reckless positions. I've seen that with Tua sometimes. You know,
Jalen doesn't get hit a lot.
well,
He
and that
knows how
and
to, and
Tua
that's
doesn't have
important for
Tua does not have
preserving.
the offensive line that
Yeah.
that Jalen has either, but it's a different style of quarterbacking. But I would rather have Jalen because he can move. I mean that's my biggest thing. But I think what he said is exactly correct. But I think the challenge for Kirby moving forward is how can you recreate the not vibe, but the not just a roster, but the well, I guess it was the vibe of that group. You know, how do you create that? That is the real challenge of coaching right now in current college football, current college basketball. Is how do you create an era of accountability when accountability can leave every 6 months?
Yeah, part of that is that was an older team, right?
It
Those
was
teams had a lot of older guys, and I don't know that you're getting that necessarily out of this 2025 Georgia team, especially the defense. I think is a little bit younger when you look at it across the board, but that was part of it is those guys had just been around together a
offense is
long
older
time. They had played together a long time, and it was mixed with younger players. Obviously, Jalen Carter was a sophomore in that
in
2021 season.
21.
So part of it is just people literally becoming adults, right? And not being 18, 19-year-olds. You had a lot of 21, 22, and some 23-year-olds. In Stetson's case, someone ended up being 25. So,
Mm-hmm.
but that's part of it and that is going to be going away for the most part. And we're seeing that already. And so
Seems like it.
that's going to be part of the challenge is how do you get guys to stick around? How do you get guys to buy in? For the most part, I think he's doing a pretty good job with that. You can't help that some of these players are going to look at I can't think of the metaphor, but they're going to go to the other side of the road when there's money involved or where they think, "Oh, I'm going to have more playing time."
Well, here let me add this too, real quick,
Okay.
Ryan, which is that when this house settlement comes through, which everyone sort of expects between the spring and the summer, it may be that there are restrictions on transfers because of NIL contracts and so forth. We may have seen the wild, wild west of college football, and it may soon sort of calm down. We'll see about that. But I think I think the challenge for Kirby is that he's got to figure out how to recreate what he had in 21, 22, and 23 in order to get Georgia back to national championship winners. But they could have won it this season. They would have had to have a really great game against Ohio State. But they could have won it this season. They did not. The turnovers against Notre Dame, that cost them the game, and that's what happens. I do think what Jalen Hurts had to say about Georgia is correct. But the challenge is how can Kirby recreate that moving forward. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.